Yeah, upstairs. I feel over the table. The prayers.
So let's begin by doing the prayers on the prayer sheet, little prayer booklet. If you wish to, again, you're not obliged to recite. Uh, so if you don't feel like doing the prayers, you can just meditate. The idea is to put ourselves in a positive state of mind as much as possible before we begin the class. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So the next is a prayer and mantra of the Buddha. So we'll do the prayer one time and then recite the mantra a few times. Lama tumba chomden de shin shekpa da chomba yang takpa zope sangye pa gyawa shakya tupala chak selo chuto kyapsu chiwo. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaye Soha. Om Muni Muni Maha Muni 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 Soha. So let's just sit quietly for a few more minutes, and you can use this time to settle down your mind, put aside thoughts of the past, like what you were doing today or just before coming here, and thoughts of the future, what you're going to do later tonight, tomorrow, and so on. And just try to keep your mind, your awareness here in the present moment and present place. And if you want, you can also check and make sure you have a really positive motivation for being here, an altruistic one, such as wishing this session that we're doing here tonight to be beneficial as possible, not only for ourselves, but for others, for everyone, for the world, and that it will help us all get closer to enlightenment. So we are on the first module of this program, which we call Exploring Buddhist Philosophy. And just to mention, we're getting ourselves a little bit more organized. And Martina has made a page for this program, this class. And on that page, you can find the materials, the notes that I'm preparing. And what we're going to try to do, I'll really try to do this, is have the notes ready by Tuesday at the latest, maybe Monday possible, but at least by Tuesday, so that you have them 2 days before the class. And so did you find the notes for this class? Yeah. And also there was a homework sheet for, it was just uploaded today. And yeah. And also the videos of the classes. So in case you miss a class, you can catch up on those. And what else is on there? Yeah, the prayer sheet. I think that's already been. Anyway, so whatever materials there are related to this class will go up on that website. And also, yeah, I wrote a letter just to explain a few things. So, for example, this first module on the Four Noble Truths will continue till next Thursday. So next Thursday will be the last class of this module. And then I'm going to be teaching in Sweden on Saturday the 12th, which is a week from this Saturday. And I will start the next module, which is on the Two Truths. And I think the center will be rented out that day. Is that correct? it won't be possible for people to come here and watch the videos together. I think that's what Martina told me. Anyway, we'll let you know about that later. You might have to watch those videos on your own at home if you want to follow those teachings. Does that make sense? Anyway, there's just a few little there's a letter on there for me with a few little details. Oh yeah, another thing was about questions. If you have questions about the material that you don't have a chance to ask during class, then you can write your questions to Karen. Karen volunteered to collect those questions. So her email is in this letter. And so whatever questions come, I'll try my best to answer them during the class, but we'll see how it goes. If there's a huge deluge of questions, I won't be able to answer all of them. Or if there are questions that I feel aren't quite relevant, or maybe they will be answered later in some other module, then I'll mention that. So we're sort of inventing this whole program as we go along, and it's taking a while. Hopefully things will get more and more organized as time goes on. Okay, so so far we have been looking at we finished the first noble truth of suffering, and then last week we began looking at the second noble truth, the origin of suffering. And we didn't quite finish all the notes from last week's class, so I'll carry on from where we left off. And just to remind what we did cover last week, the explanation about the origin of suffering that's given in the Tibetan tradition is that the very root cause of all suffering is ignorance, specifically ignorance that doesn't see things as they are, but sees things in a distorted way, a mistaken way, in a way that they don't really exist. And this is a really complicated topic because different Buddhist schools explain things differently. We're going to start looking at that in the next module about the two truths. But not all Buddhists are on the same page about what is ignorance and what is the true nature of phenomena. There's some subtle differences there. But usually the Tibetan tradition follows one particular school, the Madhyamika Prasangika school. So the Tibetan masters say that school is the most correct. Their explanation of things is the most correct one. So they usually follow that. So if you've been attending teachings by Tibetan lamas, you've probably heard that explanation of things. And they talk about the true nature of things being emptiness of inherent existence or independent existence. So they say in reality, everything is empty of inherent independent existence. But we don't see that. Instead, we see things just the opposite. We see things as if they were inherently existing, independently existing. Yeah, so that's our basic problem, seeing things as if they were inherently independently existing and believing that they really exist that way and acting on the basis of that. So that's our basic problem that we need to clear up. So with that ignorance in our mind, affecting our way of seeing things, then the other disturbing emotions arise, such as attachment or greed, craving, clinging, towards the people and things that we find attractive and appealing, and we want them. And then on the other hand, we have anger, aversion, hatred, sometimes aggression, destructiveness towards people and things that we find unattractive. And we want to push them away from us or get rid of them somehow. And then all the other disturbing emotions come about as well. Jealousy and pride and so on. And many different kinds of misconceptions about things. So all of these come from ignorance. Ignorance is like the root, and all these other problems arise from that. And then when our mind is under the influence of these disturbing emotions, especially attachment and anger, we tend to act and the actions that we do become the cause for suffering. So that's talking about karma. So basically, Tibetans say that the cause or the origin of suffering is these two things: delusions or afflictive emotions, which includes ignorance, greed, hatred, and so forth, and karma. So those are the two main causes of suffering. How we get ourselves into trouble, basically, how we are born into situations where we have lots of problems, and then as we go through life, we continue to have problems, and so on and so forth. So that's the explanation. And I'm saying Tibetan tradition, but it's not just the Tibetan tradition. It's also in all the traditions of Buddhism. And we'll look at this more in more detail later on with the 12 links of dependent origination. That's a more detailed explanation of the whole process of creating suffering for ourselves and getting stuck in this situation of being born again and again and again and suffering again and again. So we'll look at that later in the fourth module, the path to enlightenment. Okay, so the explanation which we went through last week and I just briefly reviewed. So that works. Do you remember the 3 types of suffering we talked about a few weeks ago? And you probably heard these as well before. Do you remember the 3 types of suffering?
The suffering of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Suffering of change.
Suffering of change. Pervasive suffering. Okay. So the suffering of suffering are the really gross, obvious, painful experiences that we have. So the explanation I just went through about how ignorance leads to attachment and anger, that leads us to actions, especially the 10 negative actions of killing, stealing, and so forth. And then that in turn leads us to being born in difficult situations and having problems and suffering and so on. So that works for the first type of suffering, the suffering of suffering. But then with regard to the other 2 types of suffering, the suffering of change, which actually refers to pleasant experiences, nice experiences. So what is the origin of those? What is the cause of those pleasant experiences? And the third type of suffering, the pervasive suffering, which covers the whole of cyclic existence. Everywhere, whoever is in samsara, cyclic existence, is covered by that type of suffering. This is a little complicated, this one, because there's an explanation in Buddhism of all the different realms of existence, the different places where we can be born and live and so forth. And you've probably heard about the 6 realms. That's the usual way of explaining the 6 realms. Do you know what the 6 realms are?
God realm, the semi-God, the human, animal, hell, and
Okay, right. Good. So that's one way of explaining the realms of existence. Then the God realm, which I prefer using the word deva, the Sanskrit term deva. These are like celestial beings. So those can be further subdivided into 27 different realms. This gets quite complicated. But the higher you go, the better it gets. It's like more and more pleasure and happiness and less suffering and so forth. So in these, in the higher God realms, they don't have the first type of suffering. They don't have any suffering of suffering. That's gone. But they still have the second and the third type of suffering. They still have the suffering of change, which is transitory pleasure that doesn't last. So it's considered another type of suffering. And they have the third type of suffering, just being in cyclic existence, just being under the control of ignorance, delusions, karma, not free, not able to experience the peace of nirvana. And then when you get to the top of the top of samsara, I think it's the last 12 of these 27 God realms. They don't even have the second type of suffering. They don't even have that. They only have the third type. So those beings are in a state of meditation all the time. Their minds are always just absorbed in meditation. Some of them don't even have a body. There's a particular 4 realms called the formless realms, where you don't even have a physical body. It's just a mind in a state of meditative absorption. Very, very calm and peaceful. And they don't even have this kind of pleasure that for them it's considered kind of too much. Even to have pleasure, it's like disturbing to the mind. So they just want to stay in a state of equanimity, meditative equanimity. It's just very calm and very peaceful for their entire life. So, but from the Buddhist point of view, those experiences are still considered suffering because they're not free of samsara. They're not out of this whole cycle, this whole wheel of life, this whole cycle of death and rebirth and so on. They're still stuck in that and haven't achieved nirvana. So we, relative to the lower realms, those higher realms are really wonderful, really, blissful, but it's still considered suffering from the point of view of Buddhism relative to nirvana. So how does ignorance and delusions and karma become the cause of those experiences? So this is explained by understanding. I don't know if this isn't always talked about, but there's one way of dividing karma into contaminated and uncontaminated karma. Have you heard about that before? Yeah, it's not always talked about. Contaminated karma is karma that is created while our mind is still under the influence or under the control of ignorance. In other words, we still are stuck in seeing things as inherently existing, even though they're not. Yeah, but we're kind of deluded by that. So we see everything as inherently existing, and then under the influence of that, we create good karma, virtuous karma, because that's the kind of karma that gets you to those higher realms. It's virtuous karma, like refraining from the 10 non-virtuous actions, creating a lot of virtue, practicing meditation. So you create virtuous karma, good karma, but because your mind isn't free of ignorance, you're still seeing things in a mistaken way, that good karma you're creating doesn't become the cause to get out of samsara, to nirvana, to enlightenment. It's the cause for more samsara. Does that make sense? This takes a while to understand, but when we go through the 12 links, it'll become a little more clear as well. So, for example, like right now, I'm teaching Dharma. I'm trying to do it with a good motivation. This would be an example of good karma, virtuous karma. But I'm not free of ignorance. I would like to be, but I'm not. So my mind is still, stuck in that mistaken way of seeing things, thinking that I'm inherently existing and all of you are inherently existing and everything else is inherently existing. So I'm still caught in that that delusion because I haven't realized emptiness yet. What we really have to do is realize emptiness, not just have an intellectual understanding, but an actual realization of emptiness. And so I haven't yet gotten to that point. So even when I'm, doing good things, creating good karma, the good karma I'm creating becomes the cause for good rebirths, good experiences within samsara, but not beyond samsara. So to get out of samsara, to attain nirvana, to attain enlightenment, what we need is uncontaminated karma. So uncontaminated karma means karma that's created with the understanding of emptiness, with the realization of emptiness. So then if we create good karma within within a realization of myself being empty of inherent existence, others being empty of inherent existence, my actions being in whatever, everything, seeing everything is empty of inherent existence, then that becomes uncontaminated karma. And that becomes a cause to get out of samsara. Does that make sense? A little bit? So it's actually really tricky. It's not that easy to get out of samsara, right? Even when we create good karma, we try to create good karma, but our good karma might just be getting us again in samsara. But of course, they say that realistically it takes many, many, many lifetimes to get to enlightenment, and in the meantime we want to be born in good situations. So we want to have at least human rebirths, or born in pure lands. We want to be in places where we can continue to learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma and so on. So realistically, we will have many more rebirths within samsara to get out once and for all. So we definitely want to create good karma, virtuous karma, to make sure that we do have the right conditions to be able to continue practicing the Dharma and continue following the path and get ourselves out of samsara.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Where do we put the pure lands? Because it's not one of the 6 rules.
Yeah, that's
Or
tricky.
is it?
No, it's not quite. Pure lands are special places. Yeah, it's not quite samsara, not quite out of samsara. Yeah, that's a kind of tricky question. Where do they fit in? Yeah. And that's certainly an option as well. If you really want to get out of samsara, to create the causes to be born in a pure land, Amitabha's pure land, or Medicine Buddha's pure land, or whatever pure land there is. And there you have really ideal conditions to continue practicing and get yourself out of samsara. Okay, so that maybe also helps you understand how important it is to understand emptiness. So emptiness is such an important topic. That's what we really need to get out of this whole situation of suffering. So it's good to try as much as we can to understand emptiness, go to teachings, read books, think about it, meditate on it, to work on getting an understanding of emptiness, but at the same time to create virtue, good karma, refraining from the non-virtuous actions that tend on virtues, doing whatever else you can to create good karma. And also work on the mind, work on decreasing the disturbing emotions, the greed, the hatred, the ignorance, and so on. And just to mention one other little fine point with regard to disturbing emotions. This includes ignorance. It also includes anger and attachment and so forth. In the philosophical teachings, they say that there are 2 levels of these disturbing emotions. One is called acquired. Yeah, that's the usual term, acquired. And the other is innate or inborn. So acquired delusions are those that come about through education, through conditioning. Like, for example, we're born in our family, in a particular country, society. We go to school, we learn things, and based on our learning and our education, we can develop certain types of misconceptions or certain types of disturbing emotions. Like, for example, people tend to become very proud of their country. I'm not saying, we shouldn't like our country and so on, but sometimes that becomes excessive nationalistic pride, and then that in turn can become problematic. Countries get into war with other countries and so on. So, or with race, with religion, right? People can become very attached to their own particular race and religion and ethnic group and so on and so forth. And then that can lead to conflicts and even wars if we're not careful. So those would be examples of attachments and aversions that are acquired as opposed to innate. So innate or inborn, the other type of disturbing emotions are those that we're born with. We already have them when we're born. Like some people in the West tend to think that babies are born with a totally pure mind, like a blank slate. But the Buddhist view is not like that. We're already born. We already come into this life with anger, with attachment, with a sense of I, with ignorance, and we carry these disturbing emotions with us from past lives. So there are these two divisions, two types. And when it comes to the path and following the path and getting ourselves higher and higher and eventually out of samsara and to nirvana and enlightenment, we need to remove both of these types of delusions from our mind. The acquired ones are easier. Those are easier to get rid of. The innate ones, the inborn ones, are much stickier. They're really, really deeply rooted in our mind and need to be, takes more time to get rid of those. But the ultimate antidote for both types of disturbing emotions is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So that's the only thing that will really clear out all of the disturbing emotions and ignorance at the very root of it. But again, in the meantime, because it does take quite a while to realize emptiness, we can still work on our disturbing emotions. There's lots and lots of antidotes we can apply. For example, anger. There's books full of methods for working on anger. Like in English, there's one by the Dalai Lama called, I think it's called Healing Anger. Have you come across that? He's giving teachings on Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, chapter 6, which is about patience. So many, many different ideas, methods, antidotes for anger. And there's a book by Thupten Chodron called Working with Anger, and one by Thich Nhat Hanh. I haven't read it, but also I think it's just called Anger. So if that's a problem for you, then there's lots of material you can get for working on anger. It said that normally the main antidote is love, loving kindness. So working on cultivating more and more love and kindness will help us to decrease our anger. But there's many other methods as well, because it's not that easy to just switch your mind. If you're already angry at somebody, to just switch it to loving kindness. So you may need some intermediary steps to make that switch. And then there's other methods for attachment and jealousy and so forth. I'm going to actually be talking about this later on, but in the Tuesday night class, I'm going to go through the different disturbing emotions and talk about how to work with them. It's one of my favorite subjects. It's so useful. Okay, so then the last topic with this particular truth, the truth of the origin of suffering, is the four aspects of the truth of origin. And I can't remember whether I mentioned this. So each of the Four Noble Truths has four aspects. So that makes 16 altogether. So in the Mahayana text, not just the Tibetan ones, but the ones that go back to India, and the Indian masters, there's a lot of talk about these 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So these are objects to meditate on. And the four aspects related to each of the four truths are antidotes to particular misconceptions, particular delusions. So I'll mention that with these four. Okay, so the truth of origin, mainly this is talking about, as I mentioned before, the two things: disturbing emotions, ignorance, greed, hatred, and so on, and karma, specifically contaminated karma. So those are the causes of suffering, the origins of suffering. So the first of the four aspects is causes. Okay, so these two things, delusions and karma, are causes of suffering. They rise in us almost constantly. We may think, well, I don't get angry very much, but attachment, if you really watch your mind, then you can see attachment coming up quite a lot. That's pretty prevalent. And ignorance is there almost constantly. So they're almost always in our mind, and they bring about suffering. They are the causes of suffering. So it's said that just their nature, the nature of these disturbing emotions, is that they cause suffering. And this is something you can start to notice if you practice meditation, and you are able to get your mind somewhat calm and quiet. If anger or even just a little bit of irritation arises or attachment arises, it disturbs the mind. And that's actually the definition of a delusion. A delusion is defined as something that disturbs the mind. It causes the mind to be agitated, unpeaceful, not calm and clear. It's like, when you put a pot of water on top of the stove and turn the gas on, and after a while it starts to bubble and boil. So that's what happens in our mind when disturbing emotions arise. They become agitated, not calm and cool and peaceful. So this is something you can see for yourself if you observe your mind, especially in meditation. So that's just the nature of these types of mind, disturbing emotions. They disturb our mind. And so reflecting on this particular aspect is an antidote to the idea that suffering is without cause. There's no cause of suffering. And this was a view held by a particular Indian school of philosophy called Charvaka. I don't know if they still exist, but they did exist in the past. And this particular, they're actually quite similar to materialists, scientific materialists, because they only believe in things that can be seen. If you can't see something, it doesn't exist. So they didn't believe in past lives and future lives and karma because you can't see it. You can't see past lives, you can't see future lives, so they don't exist. So anything that can't be seen is denied. So that particular school apparently denied that there was any cause of suffering. And that's also a kind of view that's held by a lot of people today. Like they just say, oh, well, it's bad luck. Something bad happens, it's just bad luck. They don't necessarily look for deeper reasons or causes or origins of problems and suffering. So anyway, the Buddha teaching, the Buddhist view is suffering does have causes, and the causes lie within our own mind, specifically disturbing emotions and karma. The second of the four aspects is origins. So delusions and karma are origins of suffering. It's hard for me actually to see the difference between these two terms, cause and origin. Cause and orange, there are different terms, but they seem to be quite similar. Anyway, delusions and karma are origins of suffering because they produce many different types of suffering again and again, all throughout our life. And reflecting on this aspect is the antidote to the idea that suffering has only one cause. And that view is held by another non-Buddhist school called the Dipakas. I've never heard of them before. But anyway, they had the view that all suffering is caused by just one cause, permanent time. I didn't find any further explanation of that, but this is what I found this in Jeffrey Hopkins' book, Meditation on Emptiness. But some people nowadays might have a similar view. For example, there are people who think that all of their problems are caused by their mother or by their father or by the government, right? So they're pointing their finger at just one thing, one person, one situation, saying, all my problems come from that. Yeah. And it's usually something outside of themselves rather than inside of themselves. They don't want to look inside of themselves and see that maybe there's something in there that's causing their suffering, their problems. The third aspect is strong producers of suffering, strong production. So the explanation of this is delusions and karma strongly produce suffering. They produce suffering with great force. And we can think of times when really strong disturbing emotions come up, like really strong anger, or strong attachment, like you get just totally obsessed with something, or strong depression or strong fear. So sometimes these disturbing emotions come up in a really strong way, and our mind just gets totally taken over by them, just like, a tsunami wave. We're just sort of completely overwhelmed by these disturbing emotions, and then we may not have any control over our behavior, and we may act in a very destructive way and create a lot of problems. So it said that reflecting on this aspect is the antidote to the idea that sufferings are produced by others, such as Ishvara. Ishvara is the name of a Hindu god. So there were non-Buddhists in India who believed that Ishvara was the creator of the world, the creator of everything, which is similar to followers of the monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, who also say there's a single God, only one God, and he's responsible for everything. He's the creator of everything. So I remember, when this big tsunami happened in Southeast Asia, I think it was about 10 years ago, and there were people saying, oh, well, it was God who did this, I don't know, why would God do such a thing? But anyway, this is what people were saying. So this view is still existing today, that the idea that there's a God who is the creator of suffering. Then the fourth aspect is conditions of suffering. So in Buddhism, they talk about causes and conditions. And for example, when there's the growth of a tree or a plant or vegetables or whatever, the main cause is the seed. That's the thing that's really bringing about the plant or the tree. And then the conditions would be all the other factors necessary for that to happen. So, you need water, of course. That's the main thing. Water is needed, and then soil with nutrients in the soil, and a certain temperature. If it's too cold, if it's, sub-zero degrees, then it won't happen. So you need all these conditions in order for this growth to take place, for this tree to grow. So that's the meaning of conditions. They're sort of supplementary or complementary factors that give rise to some result. So these two things we're talking about, delusions and karma, are the causes of suffering. They are also conditions of suffering. So they condition the rise of suffering. For example, attachment to samsara, cyclic existence, acts as a cooperative condition that produces suffering, not allowing us to be free from samsara. So it's saying that not only, is ignorance and delusions and karma, those are the causes of suffering, but also attachment to samsara. We tend to be attached to samsara. We tend to think samsara is a great place, and we don't really want to get out. Except when we're really miserable, then we want to get out. But when things are going well, then we kind of feel, well, I like it here. I don't really want to get out. So that's like a cooperative condition for suffering. And it said, I don't understand this one, but I'll repeat it anyway. It said that reflecting on this aspect is the antidote to the idea that the nature of things, for example, sufferings, is permanent, but their states are changeable. I guess there's some people who have that particular view, that the nature of things is permanent, but their states are changeable. Buddhism wouldn't agree with that. They would say that, you know, within cyclic existence is impermanent, not permanent. It's undergoing changes all the time. So anyway, that's it for the second noble truth, the truth of origin. And now I hope I'm not giving you too much information and overwhelming you. If you don't understand all of it, it might help to at least think, wow, there's a lot more to the Four Noble Truths than I thought before. You know, you can understand the Four Noble Truths in a very simple way, but actually they're very, very deep. There's a lot of material there. So I'll go on a little bit longer and then we'll stop and have a break, and then we'll do some meditation on some of this material. I'd like to move on to the third noble truth, which is the truth of cessation. Now, this term cessation can be a little abstract. Like, what does that mean? So in the sutra of the first turning of the wheel, as with all four truths, the Buddha spoke about it in these three phases. First, just its nature, the nature of this particular truth. So with respect to that, the Buddha said, now this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, because he had mentioned that the cause of suffering was craving. So now he's talking about the complete cessation of that, the fading away, the elimination of craving, the giving up and relinquishment of it, freedom from it, non-reliance of it. So that's the meaning of cessation. And then the second of the three phases is, what do we do with this? How do we practice this? How do we relate to it? So the Buddha said, this noble truth of the cessation of suffering is to be realized. Okay, so that's our goal, is to realize this or to attain it. Okay, so cessation is something we want to attain. So I don't know if you remember the other noble truths. The first noble truth, suffering, the Buddha said, that's to be known, that's to be understood. We have to know it, we have to understand it. And the second noble truth, the origin of suffering, the Buddha said, that's to be abandoned, get rid of it, wipe it out, clear it away. That's what we want to do with that one. Now, this noble truth is cessation. What we want to do with this one is to realize it, to attain it, to make it part of us. So that's what cessation, that's what we want to practice with that. And then the third of the three phases is what is accomplished by practicing. And what is accomplished here is, the Buddha said, this noble truth of cessation of suffering has been realized. So he's talking about his own experience. This is what he did. He attained it. He realized it. He achieved it. He got it. He made it part of himself. So in the sutra, the Buddha specifically mentions cessation of craving, but we need to apply this to all the other disturbing emotions: ignorance, attachment, hatred, jealousy, pride. So all the disturbing emotions and the karma, the origins of suffering, all of those need to be ceased, cleared away, gotten rid of, and then we achieve cessation. So this term cessation is a little tricky. A little hard to understand, but we might get an understanding of it if we think about times. We all have these moments, these experiences where, let's say with anger, okay? anger, irritation, all the various shades of that particular disturbing emotion, even dislike or impatience, we just don't feel them. They're just not there in our mind. You know, we feel very calm and peaceful and good about ourselves, good about the world. Everything feels right. You have those moments sometimes. You're not angry, you're not irritated, you're not unhappy about anything. Yeah. So that's like a cessation. Yeah. Cessation of anger, cessation of irritation. But it doesn't last. In fact, it can be over very quickly. If somebody comes along and throws something at you or yells at you, or, you know, some unpleasant things suddenly happens, you know, the cessation of anger isn't there anymore because anger is there, irritation is there, unhappiness is there. But we do have moments, we do have, you know, for periods of time, uh, a cessation or a freedom of a particular disturbing emotion. So that's the meaning of cessation. It means that that particular disturbing emotion just isn't there. But in with the third noble truth, it's talking about a permanent cessation, a cessation that lasts. The particular disturbing emotion, like anger, is gone forever and will never come back. So that's the real meaning here. So in the philosophical text, they talk about two kinds of cessation. One is called an analytical cessation, and the second is a non-analytical cessation. So an analytical cessation, it sounds complicated, but it simply means that this is the kind of cessation you achieve as a result of going through some investigation, analysis, analyzing how things exist. You know, it's like you're really looking into the nature of things. How do things exist? How do I exist? How does my body exist? How does the world exist? How does everything exist? So if you do that kind of analysis in the correct way, you will come to realize emptiness. You will come to a realization of emptiness. And when you realize emptiness, that is what wipes out or brings about the cessation of the delusions, ignorance, anger, attachment, and so forth. And that kind of cessation, the cessation that comes about through analyzing and then realizing emptiness, that is this permanent cessation. It's not just a temporary one that lasts for a few minutes or a few hours, but it's forever. So the disturbing emotions are gone in such a way they will never come back. And that's what the Buddha achieved. That's what the Buddha achieved, sitting under the Bodhi tree. He managed to wipe out those disturbing emotions once and for all so that they will never come back. And then the other type of cessation is called a non-analytical cessation, and because it doesn't come about through doing analysis into the nature of things, it could come about through other things. Like, for example, when you're just feeling really calm and peaceful, maybe you just had a great massage, or you're just sitting in a really wonderful place and, you know, nice music is playing and, you know, there's just nothing disturbing you at that point in time. And so in that moment, in that situation, you're just not feeling angry. So that's an example of a non-analytical cessation. So it's a temporary absence of a particular disturbing emotion, not because you've gone through an analysis and understood the real nature of things, but because other conditions that could trigger off your anger or whatever disturbing emotion is, those are not there. Those are not happening. Okay, so the absence of conditions is there, but that could change, right? So the conditions could come back, bam, the anger comes up. And then another example is if you're totally absorbed in something like reading a book or watching TV or whatever, then you may not feel like eating food. You have no desire to eat food because your mind is just totally focused on what you're doing. So that, again, that's like a temporary cessation of desire for food. but it's only temporary because, you know, when the game's over, the movie's over, you finish the book, or the hunger is just getting too strong, then the desire for food will come back. So non-analytical cessations are temporary, not permanent. They come and go. So what we need to achieve, and this is what the Buddha is talking about in the Third Noble Truth, is the first type of cessation, the analytical one, the one that lasts, the one that doesn't just come and go, but is a permanent one. I'll just do one more thing, then we'll have a break. This is something in Geshe Tashi's book, which I thought was really nice. He's quoting from the Dalai Lama. He says that in the Dalai Lama's teachings, he says that we shouldn't just accept that liberation, that's another way of saying cessation, is possible just because it is stated in the scriptures. Instead, if we can recognize how we sometimes experience a temporary cessation of a delusion, such as anger, we can infer that complete liberation is possible. So the texts say that there are 4 steps to achieving complete cessation. First, seeing that delusions and suffering are permanent. And this is something we can see. We can see in our own experience. We can see that, okay, there are times when I'm angry, times when I'm not. Anger isn't permanent. It's not always there. And the same with the other disturbing emotions. They come and they go. And our suffering comes and goes. These things are impermanent, not permanent. Okay, so we can get a sense of how they're impermanent. That's the first step. Second step, seeing that there are methods to deal with them. Okay, now this is a big part of Buddhist teachings, methods for working on our disturbing emotions. Meditation itself is a method. Yeah, doing mindfulness, doing concentration. When we do meditation, we have times when our mind gets really, really calm, and even if some noise is happening or something is going on, it doesn't bother us. You know, we feel so calm. So we can see that it's possible to work on our minds in such a way that we can reduce our disturbing emotions. They're not just, you know, just flying around out of control. Third step, seeing that these methods are available to us. they're right there, you know, in the Buddhist teachings, and, you know, which are still very much alive today. They're being taught all over the world. They're being taught right here in Copenhagen. And plenty of books, lots and lots of books and material on internet, lots and lots of resources where we can learn methods for working on our disturbing emotions. It's not, I mean, we shouldn't take this for granted, because there are a lot of people in the world who don't have access to this kind of information, right? So we're really fortunate, really, really fortunate. And then the 4th step is seeing that we ourselves can apply these methods. I can do it, right? The methods are there. I have access to them, and I can practice them. I am capable of practicing them, especially if we do, you know, try them out and we see, hey, that really works. Yeah, that particular method really helps me to have less anger, or it really helps me to have less attachment. They really work, and I can do it. So if we can go through these 4 steps, we'll do a meditation on this later to deepen our understanding of it. Then that will help us to have more confidence in the possibility of cessation, that it is possible to eliminate our disturbing emotions and our karma and our delusion, all these things, and then attain freedom from suffering, attain liberation. So I think the Dalai Lama is saying, you know, don't just believe it kind of blindly because the Buddha said so, the texts say so, but really investigate it, think about it, and see how it's possible. And when you come to that kind of an understanding, you know, then you're really convinced. You have like a strong conviction. It's your experience rather than just somebody else saying so. Okay, so let's have a break here for 10 minutes. Is that okay? And then we'll do some meditation. So let's do some meditation on that last point I was talking about, those 4 steps to get a better understanding of, and also confidence in the possibility of achieving cessation, the complete removal or cessation, stopping of both suffering and the causes of suffering. Okay, so the first step is to try to see that suffering and its causes, delusions and karma, are impermanent rather than permanent. So just spend some time trying to remember, bring to mind experiences that you have had of how at certain times your mind may be very much disturbed by some emotion, anger or attachment or fear or jealousy or depression or whatever. But then it passes. It's not there permanently, every minute, every second, every day, but it's something that comes and goes. So just explore your own experience to try to find examples of that. And it can also be helpful to bring to mind times when you experience the opposite emotion, like instead of anger, hatred, you felt love, kindness, compassion, or instead of attachment, you felt easy and able to give, able to let go. Then the second step is to see that there are methods that can be used, like antidotes to the disturbing emotions. So there are things you can do, methods you can use to work on decreasing anger, attachment, and so forth, and even transforming your mind so that instead of feeling those disturbing emotions, you can feel the positive counterparts. So So try to remember examples you have had of using an antidote, using a method with regard to a disturbing emotion, and how it helped, how it worked. And then the third step is contemplating that methods for working on and overcoming or transforming our disturbing emotions are available to us. We have access to them. So the Buddha's teachings, as well as the various commentaries written by the Indian masters and the Tibetan masters, such as the Lamrim and the mind training text and so on, are filled with methods on how we can work on our mind and our disturbing emotions. And we have easy access. There are teachers teaching these methods. There are lots of books, other resources on the internet, and CDs, and so forth. And we also live in a society where nobody puts restrictions on us attending these teachings and buying these books and using them and so on. We try to recognize how fortunate we are that we have the ability to learn these methods and practice them as much as we wish. And then the fourth step is to investigate whether or not we are able to use these methods. So this is the question you need to ask yourself. There are methods for working on the mind, transforming the mind. They're available to me. I have access to them. But can I practice them? Do I have the wish? Do I have the time? Do I have the energy to be able to practice these methods? So just ask yourself honestly about that, and See if there are any obstacles or hindrances to you putting these methods into practice. And if there are, can those obstacles be overcome? So when you feel ready to end the meditation, you can slowly open your eyes, relax your position. So with regard to those points, it's mainly looking at practicing the Dharma, practicing the path, practicing the methods for working on ourselves. And sometimes Westerners, I don't know if other people are prone to this, but sometimes we get very, very enthusiastic when we hear certain teachings, or we meet a certain teacher that really inspires us, and then we think, oh, I'm just going to practice 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day and give up everything else and just practice. And sometimes, many times, if people try to do that kind of thing, it doesn't work very well. They may be able to do that for 1 or 2 days or 1 week or something, but eventually they get tired, and then they may stop practicing altogether. So apparently this happened in Tibet as well. They actually have an expression for it. People would sort of run off to the mountains after hearing about Milarepa. They'd hear about Milarepa, and then they'd run off and sit in a cave for a few days, and then they'd get cold and hungry and come home. So I think the expression they have is hairy renunciation. I don't know quite why they call it that, but anyway, that kind of thing did happen in Tibet. So so we have to be realistic about our abilities. And I mean, yeah, there are people like Milarepa who can do that kind of thing, but he's probably a rare person, and most of us wouldn't be able to practice like that. So you have to have a really, really strong mind, and also a lot of merit, a lot of good karma, a lot of good energy. So we have to know our abilities and our limitations and practice according to that, because trying to do more than we're capable of may not be the right thing for us. And there's one saying that I've heard that I find really helpful. They say that the way of practicing ideally should be the way that an elephant walks. So an elephant, you probably don't see too many elephants walking around Denmark, but anyway, they say elephants, as long as they're not kind of crazy, they walk in a very steady way, you know. And then because they're big and strong, they can keep going for a really long time. They just keep going in the same direction. So they say the way that we practice should be like that. In other words, we should just go at a very steady, even rate in our practice. Like keep practicing every day, you know, do your practice every day. If you can't do it every day, at least a few times a week, but don't practice in spurts. So they say, don't be like a rabbit, the way that a rabbit runs. You know, it kind of runs really fast in one direction, then it stops, and then it turns and runs another direction, and then it stops, and it's just kind of crazy and all over the place. So sometimes our practice might be like that. Like we have this really strong energy and practice for a while, and then we stop for 6 months and don't do anything. And then we start again, and then we stop. So try not to be like that, because like that, you won't get very far. Whereas if you just keep practicing in a very steady way, the way that an elephant walks, you know, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, Lama Yeshe used to say that to us. Even if you meditate 5 minutes a day, it's good. Something will happen, something will change. So if we just keep doing that every day, whatever amount of time we can do it, slowly, changes will happen. And that seems to be the little I've read and heard about neuroscience. That yeah, that's how the brain changes as well. You know, just like keep doing it, even just a little bit, 5 minutes a day. You know, will bring about changes in your brain. And it's really a question of habit and familiarity. What we're trying to do is change the old unhealthy habits, like being angry and impatient or depressed or whatever, changing those old habits and developing new ways of thinking, new ways of reacting to things, new ways of looking at things. So just doing a little bit regularly, again and again over time, will definitely bring about changes. What do they call it? Neural pathways. What is the term?
Plasticity.
Yeah, there's something about making new neural pathways in the brain. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought to throw that in about practicing. Okay, so there's a bit more material about the third truth of cessation. I may not cover everything that's in the notes because some of it's, yeah, complicated. So one thing, Geshe talks about it in the book here, is with regard to the difference between nirvana and enlightenment. So that's not always so clear in people's minds. So it's good to look at that. So you've probably heard about how in Buddhism there's these two main traditions. There's the Mahayana, so in Tibet, China, Japan, Korea, or the northern Asian countries, the tradition of Buddhism that's followed is the Mahayana. Maha meaning great, yana vehicle, so the great vehicle. And then the Tibetan tradition tends to use this term Hinayana for the other ones. But that term is a little derogatory because it kind of means the lesser vehicle. And in the countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, and so on, they use the term Theravada, which Thera means the elders or the old, the older ones. So it's the tradition of the elders. And that's the term they use, and that's the term they like. And they don't like the term Hinayana. So I also try to avoid using the term Hinayana. But anyway, it's a little complicated. Anyway, so let's say these two traditions. There's the Mahayana and the Theravada. And there are differences between them. Probably the main difference is in terms of what goal they're striving to achieve and their motivation. why they are practicing. Okay, so in the Theravada tradition, the motivation is freeing oneself from suffering and the causes of suffering. The first two noble truths, they want to get rid of suffering, all types of suffering, and also the causes of suffering, delusions, karma, and so forth. So that's their motivation. And the goal they wish to achieve is nirvana. That's one term for it. Sometimes it's also called liberation. Moksha is the, I think it's the Sanskrit term. Emancipation. So there's different terms for that goal, but that's what they want to achieve. Get themselves out, free themselves, get themselves out of the prison of samsara. Then in the Mahayana, the motivation is to help all living beings, right? Seeing that all living beings are suffering and don't want to suffer, and you yourself wish them to not suffer and wish them to be happy. So you decide to take on this responsibility of helping all of them. And the goal of the Mahayana is Buddhahood, full enlightenment, Buddhahood. So a person following the Mahayana wants to attain Buddhahood, become a Buddha, and then devote themselves totally till the end of time to helping everybody else, all other living beings, to be free of to get them out of samsara and get them to enlightenment as well. So is there a difference between the two goals? The goal of the Theravada, which is what we call nirvana, the goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood. Now, this is a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of discussion and debate about it. And Geshe Tashi in his book mentions that, I hadn't heard this before, but he said in some Theravada books, they say there's no difference. There's no difference between nirvana and Buddhahood. They're the same. But in the Tibetan tradition, and as I mentioned before, mainly we follow the Madhyamika Prasangika school. We say there are differences between the nirvana, which is achieved by someone following this Theravada path or Hinayana path, and the Buddhahood that is attained by someone following the Mahayana path. And one of the differences, and one of the main differences, is with regard to what is being eliminated from the mind. So that's how it relates to this third noble truth, cessation. Okay, because cessation means we're getting rid of well, we were talking about delusions and karma, but in a general way, in a bigger way, there's the term obscurations. Sometimes they also use the word stains. Okay, so all the stains, all the negative factors in the mind. So in the Mahayana texts, they talk about two groups, two categories of obscurations. They use this term obscurations. And one type of obscuration, Geshe Tashi in his book calls it obscurations of defilements, but in the master's program, basic program, and so on, we were calling it afflictive obscurations. And so what's included in that group are all of the delusions, ignorance, anger, hatred, and so on, and all the different types of delusions, of which there are many. But ignorance is the main one. So all of those, that group of things, are called afflictive obscurations or obscurations of defilements. And those obscurations have to be eliminated in order to attain nirvana, in order to get yourself out of samsara and attain the state of liberation from samsara. And a person who has done that, a person who's achieved that is called an arhat. Have you heard of that term? Arhat, which in English we usually translate it as foe destroyer. The foe here, foe like an enemy, the foe here is the delusions. Okay, you've destroyed the delusions. The Tibetan term for this is drachomba, which we read in the prayer, drachomba. It's one of the epithets of a Buddha, because a Buddha has totally destroyed all the delusions in the mind. Okay, so someone who's done that, which is quite an incredible achievement. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to just get rid of all the delusions in your mind. They're called an arhat. So they have eliminated this first type of obscuration, the afflictive obscurations. And the second kind of obscuration, which in the master's program we were calling them knowledge obscurations. Geshe Tashi in his book calls them obscurations of knowledge. Not so different. This is another kind of obscuration or stain in the mind. And this is the one you have to eliminate to become a Buddha, to become like a fully enlightened Buddha, like Shakyamuni Buddha and so on. So what's that? What are those? There are differences among the different schools about what those are. But according to the Prasangika school, you've probably heard this before, they are imprints left in the mind by the delusions. And they say it's similar to, you probably heard this. They say if you have some smelly thing like onion and garlic, and you have them in a pot, and there's a strong smell, even after you take away the onions and the garlic, the smell is still there. There's no more onion, no more garlic, but the smell is still there. So they say this is like that. So even after all the delusions have been eliminated from the mind, no more ignorance, no more hatred, no more greed, none of those disturbing emotions, there's still some imprints there. Because those delusions have been in the mind for such a long time, there's still some residue, some traces left of them. And that's what is included in this second type of obscuration. And in order to become a Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha, those have to be eliminated as well. So someone who has eliminated those, who has achieved the cessation of those, is a Buddha and a fully enlightened being. Now, these the second type of obscuration is, you might wonder, well, does it really need to be eliminated? Is it really that bad? It is, because these imprints of delusions, they're not delusions themselves, but they have the effect of causing us to see things in a mistaken way. So, so they say, even after you've eliminated ignorance, when you're meditating, when you're in a state of meditation, you're seeing things correctly. Okay, your mind is seeing emptiness, so it's correct. But when you finish your meditation, you get up and walk around and do things, things will still appear as if they are inherently existing. So even though things aren't inherently existing, they still appear that way. Your mind is still caught in that delusion, or that, and not a delusion, but it's more like a hallucination. They use the word sometimes, hallucination. You're still hallucinating. You're still seeing things that aren't there. So that's a problem. That's a problem. That prevents you from becoming a Buddha. And being able to do the best you can do, be the best you can be and help all living beings. So that's the difference between the Arhat, who has followed the Hinayana or Theravada tradition and achieved the end result of that path, and the Buddha, one who has followed the Mahayana path and achieved the end result of that. So the Arhat has not eliminated the imprints of the delusions of ignorance in particular. So they still see things as if they're inherently existing. Whereas a Buddha is free of that. A Buddha sees everything is empty of inherent existence. So it may not be that easy to understand this, but it is considered an important point. And this, again, like I said, it relates to this truth of cessation. So there is a difference with regard to cessation, what has been ceased, what has been wiped out, cleared out, eliminated from the mind, between the people who have followed these two paths and achieved the end result of it. Does that make sense? Is that? And also, but there's a lot more than that. I mean, becoming a Buddha, you get all these incredible qualities and abilities and powers and so on. So it's not just that you've eliminated more, but having eliminated the traces of delusions, the traces of ignorance, it really opens up your mind to unbelievable abilities. And then, of course, your whole goal is to help sentient beings. Yeah, you're not just doing it to enjoy yourself, but you want to help sentient beings. So Buddha then has all these amazing abilities to help sentient beings in amazing ways. And then there's another kind of little question that comes up here with regard to those who follow the Theravada or Hinayana path and achieve the state of an arhat, nirvana, liberation. What then? What's next? So there's a lot of debate, a lot of discussion about this. And I've heard that in even nowadays, some people in the Theravada tradition will say that when a person becomes an arhat, while they're still alive, they have their body and they're walking around and doing things, and they're there. And then when they die, when their life comes to an end, finished. Everything's finished. Not just their body, but also their mind. The mind goes out of existence as well. That's the end of everything. But apparently not everybody agrees with that. There's a debate about that in the Theravada world. Some don't agree. Some say that the mind doesn't go out of existence, but we don't really know what happens to it. It's something inconceivable, inexpressible, unknowable. But to say it actually goes out of existence isn't correct. So even within the Theravada tradition, that's debated. But in the Mahayana tradition, we say, no way. The mind never goes out of existence. And most of the Mahayana traditions will say that someone who's achieved that state of an arhat eventually will enter the Mahayana path, develop bodhicitta, follow the Mahayana path, and become a Buddha. Buddha won't let them not reach enlightenment. Buddha will shake them up, wake them up out of their state of blissful peace of nirvana and say, hey, you're not finished. You got more work to do. And then guide them to full enlightenment. So anyway, there's different points of view about this, that particular point. So most of the Mahayana school, especially the Prasangika, the one that we follow, say everyone will eventually become a Buddha. Everyone will eventually end up in Buddhahood. Okay, just one last thing we'll cover, the four aspects of the truth of cessation. And so cessation, again, is talking about this complete elimination of both suffering and the causes of suffering through applying antidotes. So that phenomena, cessation, which it's not something outside somewhere, it's something, it's a factor, you might say, a factor of a person's mind, someone who has eliminated the delusions, has this cessation within themselves. Okay, so the 4 aspects. The first aspect is cessation. And it's cessation because suffering has been abandoned. Suffering has been abandoned. So reflecting on this is an antidote to a view which was held by some non-Buddhist schools that it's not possible to become liberated from suffering. So they said there's no such thing. And nowadays as well, people may say that, no, it's not possible for human beings to be free of suffering. We're always going to suffer. So some people may have that view, but the Buddhist view is, no, it is possible. Suffering can be abandoned. And the second aspect is pacification. Pacification here refers to the abandonment of the afflictions. So not just suffering, but the afflictive emotions, the disturbing emotions, the ignorance, the greed, the hatred, the causes of suffering, they are also abandoned. And it's said that reflecting on this is an antidote to the idea that some contaminated state, for example, a high state of concentration, is liberation. This is a little complicated. Do you remember earlier I was mentioning these higher realms of existence, the Deva realms? So those are states of concentration, and people achieve those states, beings achieve those states, and they're just in this blissful state of concentration, sometimes without a body even, for a long, long, long period of time. So some of the non-Buddhist schools, people achieve those states and they think that's liberation, which is easy to think, because you're just blissed out, not experiencing any suffering for a long period of time. So they reach those states and then they think that's liberation, and that's not true, because you haven't totally abandoned the causes of suffering. They're still there in the mind. They're very subtle, very subdued, but they haven't been abandoned. So later on, they can come up again. There's a story. It's in the Liberation in the Palm of the Hand about this one yogi who achieved one of these states. He was sitting in a cave, and he got into this blissful state of meditation, and he just sat there for a long, long, long time. His hair was growing, flowing all over the floor. And the rats came and started eating his hair, making nests of it or something. And then he finally, came out of his meditation and he saw what the rats had done to his hair. And he got angry. So that shows that you can achieve these incredible states of concentration, but doesn't necessarily mean you've totally eliminated your afflictive emotions. Okay, the third is sublime. So this cessation is sublime because it is a liberation that is benefit and happiness. It's a good thing. It's good for you. And it said that reflecting on this is an antidote to the idea that some suffering state is liberation. And I don't really understand this one, and I couldn't find any information about it. But my guess is that maybe there were some people who achieve some ordinary state of mind which isn't really free of suffering, and they think that's nirvana, that's liberation. This does happen. I met somebody like this in Spain a couple of years ago, this young kid who was convinced that he had attained nirvana, but it was pretty obvious that he hadn't, because he was like stressed out. But he thought he had attained nirvana. So I guess this kind of thing can happen. They reach some state which isn't free of suffering at all, but they somehow think that that's nirvana, liberation. So if you really achieve nirvana, you really achieve liberation, then it's no more suffering. You really don't have any more suffering. Oh, I shouldn't laugh. That's quite sad. Anyway. No, we were trying to talk to this guy. Maybe it isn't really nirvana, but he just wouldn't listen. Okay. The fourth one is definite emergence. And so cessation is definite emergence because it is a liberation that is irreversible. You won't fall back from it. So meditating on this is an antidote to the idea that it's possible to attain liberation and still lose it, still fall back. And apparently this idea does exist, because I was reading in the Zen tradition some article written by a Zen teacher. He was talking about enlightenment and how you attain enlightenment, but you still have delusions. You still get angry, you still have, and so on. So I think they have a different way of explaining enlightenment. But anyway, even within Buddhism, apparently there are people who have this idea that you can achieve something like enlightenment or nirvana, but your work isn't finished. You still have delusions coming up. But the correct view, as my teachers explain it, is if you really achieve nirvana or Buddhahood, enlightenment, you really achieve a cessation, a real cessation, then the delusions, the disturbing emotions don't come back. They never come back. And if they do come back, that means you haven't really achieved. You haven't really got there. Yeah, maybe you thought you did, but you haven't. Anyway, so that's it for the third noble truth. Next week we'll do the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path. So there were some, in the last set of notes that I sent, there were some meditations, suggested meditations related to the third noble truth and also the second one. So if you have time to do any of those meditations, we did one of them tonight, so you can do that. And there are some other meditations about the origins of suffering and faults of afflictions and so on. So if you have time and energy to do any of those meditations, then that would be good. Is there any like burning questions you feel like you have to ask? I'm just looking at the time. We have a few minutes left. If you want to ask something. Can also bring them up next week. Okay, so let's conclude by reading the dedication prayers. So try to feel a sense of rejoicing in what we have done here tonight, coming together and generating a positive aspiration, positive motivation. And then listening to these teachings on the Buddhist path to liberation, to enlightenment. So we've created some good energy, some merit. And it's important to rejoice when we create merit, to feel this was good. It was good to do these things. I'm glad that I did these things. And then we can dedicate this merit. We can share this merit with others so that it becomes beneficial not just for ourselves, but also for others. So just as at the beginning, we had the wish that this session tonight will be beneficial to others, to the world. So let's remember that and now dedicate the positive energy to that same goal. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In a land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Oh, one other thing before I forget. So again, there will be this long life puja for Lama Zopa Rinpoche in Singapore next week, 13th of March. Martin and Maria are going to be going to represent this center. And they're going to make an offering to Rinpoche for his long life of a donation to a local, what's the name of this place?
It's a place for homeless women in Copenhagen.
Yes.
Indonesia.
Okay. So anyone who would like to contribute to that donation, the box is over there. So this is your last chance because they'll be leaving Monday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Leaving on Monday. Okay. So if you'd like to make it, any amount is fine, even 1 kroner. So it's both helping this women's shelter, but also helping Lama Zopa Rinpoche have a long life, because this is a kind of gift. Or the donation is being made on behalf of Rinpoche and merit dedicated for Rinpoche's long life. It's a way to create a lot of benefit. Okay, thank you, and see you next week. Oh, please this here.